Welcome to today's debate on global middle class. This IS episode 2.
In a shocking number of countries right now, paying for just a standard middle-class home requires more than 100% of an average worker's monthly income.
Yeah, it's a terrifying statistic.
It really is. The math is completely detached from reality at this point. We are looking at a landscape where the middle class is feeling this, unprecedented squeeze. From stagnant real wages in emerging markets all the way to declining intergenerational mobility in the West.
And it forces us to confront what's actually happening under the hood of the global economy, right? Because it's not just a Western issue anymore.
Exactly. So the central question we are unpacking today is this. Are we witnessing a permanent systemic crisis that will fundamentally dismantle the middle class? Or is this merely a temporary period of economic stagnation and structural transition?
Right, and we're grounding this discussion in some really dense recent economic reports. We're pulling from the World Economic Forum, the Brookings Institution, the World Inequality Lab, and some really compelling on-the-ground economic analysis as well.
Right. And I will be arguing that this is a temporary stagnation, a transitional phase, where technologies like AI will eventually empower workers and our economies will adapt.
And I will be taking the stance that structural forces, from unaffordable housing to AI just outright replacing entry-level jobs, have triggered a permanent systemic crisis for the middle class.
Okay, let's get right into it. I want to start by acknowledging that the current pressures are, they are intensely painful. When you look at historical data on absolute intergenerational mobility, which is the percentage of children who grow up to earn more than their parents did at the same age, we've seen significant dips over the last few decades.
Huge dips.
Right. Like in the U.S., it fell from around 90% for children born in the 1940s down to about 50% for those born in the 1980s.
Which is a staggering drop.
It is. But here's why I view this as a temporary stagnation. Those dips are driven by correctable cyclical factors. We are experiencing a period of slow economic growth colliding with really rapid technological change. Historically, the middle class always faces friction during massive technological shifts, but it adapts.
The problem is that the foundational pillars of middle-class satisfaction are structurally broken. It isn't just friction. The basic social contract, the belief that hard work leads to prosperity and that your children will be better off, it just no longer functions.
How so?
Let me give you a concrete scenario. This is based on the analysis of financial advisor Nitin Kaushik, who tracks the lived reality of salaried professionals. He warns of something called the nominal wage trap.
Wait, I'm struggling with the math there. If someone gets a massive raise, like if their nominal wage goes up, how do they end up poorer? Can you walk me through the mechanics of that trap?
Gladly. Let's look at a worker in a major emerging market city. Say they get what looks like a fantastic promotion, jumping from a salary of 90,000 rupees a month to 150,000 rupees.
Right, a huge jump.
On paper, they feel like they finally arrived. But in emerging markets, you face a brutal dual pressure. First, you are taxed upfront on your income, exactly like a citizen in a developed nation.
Sure.
But unlike a developed nation, the state does not provide viable safety nets.
Right, because the public infrastructure for healthcare and education hasn't caught up to the population growth.
Precisely. So this worker takes their post-tax income and is immediately forced to pay market-linked, privatized prices for unavoidable essentials. They have to pay for private schools, private health insurance, and skyrocketing housing.
Which eats up the raise.
Completely. The inflation on those specific non-negotiable items isn't the headline inflation rate of 4 or 5%. It's running at 10 to 12% annually, so that massive salary jump is immediately cannibalized.
Okay, but
the traditional mathematics of middle-class savings is wiped out. They are forced to fund today's basic survival, literally just groceries, with credit cards and personal loans.
I see the severity of that, and I don't deny that inflation on essentials is punishing. But you're framing this as an inescapable permanent trap. I look at that exact same worker in an emerging market, and I see a rapid structural transformation. Economists call this premature deindustrialization.
Which is usually framed as a massive negative for developing nations, by the way.
It is, if you are strictly applying the 20th century playbook. But let's break down the mechanics of it. Historically, countries built their middle class through manufacturing. People moved from farms to factories, and that peaked when per capita income was relatively high, around $14,000 in the West.
Right.
But today, in emerging markets like India, manufacturing as a share of employment is peaking at much lower income levels, around $700 per capita.
Because automation and global supply chains have hollowed out the need for mass human labor in factories.
Exactly. Now, you see that as a permanent crisis because the old stepping stones are gone? I see it as emerging markets leapfrogging straight into skill-intensive service economies.
That's a very optimistic leap.
It creates friction for the youth right now, yes, because the educational systems are lagging behind the economic reality. But ultimately, bypassing heavy industrialization to build a digital-first, service-based middle class is a more sustainable long-term trajectory. It just requires a period of adaptation.
I hear the theory, but the lived reality of the youth in these countries completely contradicts that optimism. You cannot leapfrog into a digital service economy if the entry-level jobs in that economy are being annihilated by the very technology you claim will save them.
You mean AI?
Yes, this brings us directly to artificial intelligence. You believe AI will empower these workers? I am telling you, based on the data, that AI is actively pulling up the ladder for the youth.
Well, I look at the same data and I see it building an elevator, not pulling up a ladder. AI empowers human roles by flattening the skills curve.
Flattening it how?
Look at the recent Microsoft survey covering 31 countries. 66% of business leaders stated they wouldn't even hire someone without AI skills. And 39% of the U.S. working age population has already embraced these tools.
Yeah, the U.S. population.
But the principle holds. I want to offer an analogy here. Think about the introduction of the standardized shipping container in the 1950s.
The shipping container?
Hear me out. Before the shipping container, you had massive armies of middle-class dock workers manually loading crates of different sizes onto ships. It was labor-intensive, slow, and, well, expensive.
Sure.
When the standardized container arrived, there was absolute panic. People thought it would destroy maritime labor entirely. And yes, the specific job of manually carrying a wooden crate onto a ship vanished. But what actually happened to the economy?
It centralized shipping into massive automated ports and destroyed the waterfront economies of dozens of cities.
But it also standardized global trade. It massively reduced the friction of commerce and birthed entirely new supply chain industries. I'm talking logistics software, intermodal transport, global distribution, things that expanded the middle class globally on a scale we had never seen before.
Okay, I see where you're going.
Generative AI is the cognitive shipping container. It is taking routine cognitive tasks and standardizing them. This means a middle-class knowledge worker, maybe someone without a fancy Ivy League degree, can use an AI tool to operate at the analytical level of a senior manager. Experimental studies show it disproportionately benefits workers with lower levels of initial skills.
The shipping container analogy is clever, I'll give you that. But you are omitting a crucial piece of the mechanism. Who owns the ports?
What do you mean?
The democratization of capability doesn't matter if the economic gains of that capability are entirely captured by the top 1% who own the capital, the servers, and the AI models.
But the tools themselves are becoming universally accessible. The cost of compute is plummeting right now.
Universally accessible? Let's look at the actual infrastructure. The Brookings Institution and the International Labor Organization recently published data that shatters this universal elevator framing.
Okay, let's hear it.
In Latin America and the Caribbean, only 7 to 14% of workers can actually benefit from delegating tasks to generative AI.
Is that because of infrastructure?
Exactly. Because you need reliable broadband, electricity, and hardware. The people who have those things are already the urban, highly educated elite. The struggling middle class cannot access your cognitive shipping container. AI is acting as a bottleneck, not a buffer.
I concede that the digital divide is real, but that is a snapshot of current infrastructure, not a permanent law of nature. Infrastructure expands. Mobile internet leapfrogged landlines in those exact same markets.
But we don't have the luxury of waiting decades for infrastructure to catch up, because the job destruction is happening right now. The same Brookings data shows that 1 to 6% of jobs are at a higher risk of total automation today.
That sounds like a pretty small, manageable percentage, actually.
It might sound small, but we have to look at the mechanics of which jobs those are. They are banking, finance, and customer support.
Ah, the traditional entry-level clerical roles.
Exactly. Those are the gateway jobs. They are the precise stepping stones into the middle class, and they are disproportionately held by youth and women. If a young person cannot get that first job in basic financial processing because a generative AI chatbot is doing it for fractions of a cent, they never build the resume required to reach those higher-level analytical roles you mentioned.
Right.
The entry point is gone. The mechanism linking a young, inexperienced worker to a stable middle-class career has been completely severed.
That is a fair critique of the immediate disruption. But again, history shows that whenever we democratize a technology, we eventually expand the middle class, even if the initial disruption is incredibly painful.
I just don't see it this time.
The demand for experience is shifting away from years in the seat and toward agility. If you are a young person in an emerging market with a smartphone, you now have access to the most powerful cognitive reasoning engines ever created. That lowers the barrier to entry for producing economic value.
It lowers the barrier to producing value, yes, but it does not guarantee you will be paid for that value. And that disconnect between productivity and wages is the core of the permanent crisis. Let's look at the macroeconomic data from the World Inequality Lab's 2026 report.
Okay.
Since 1980, the global middle 40%, the literal definition of the middle class, has seen entirely stagnant wealth growth.
While the top 1% has captured the vast majority of the economic gains. Yes, the divergence is stark. I know the report.
It is more than stark, it is a structural reallocation of wealth. The global labor share of income, the amount of economic pie that goes to workers rather than investors, has fallen from 61% in 1980 to 53% today.
And capital share went up?
Right, the capital share has risen to 47%. So, if a young worker uses AI to become twice as productive but their wages remain stagnant while the cost of housing and healthcare doubles, they are still falling behind in real terms.
Let's talk about that housing cost, because that is where the squeeze is most intensely felt. I completely acknowledge the severity of the housing crisis.
It's unavoidable.
The World Economic Forum's report analyzed 21 countries and found that in 20 of them, monthly mortgage and rental payments exceed 33% of monthly income, which is the global threshold for affordability. And in places like Brazil, Colombia, and Nigeria, those payments frequently exceed 100%. It is an intense squeeze.
Squeeze implies a temporary pressure. This is a barricade.
A barricade?
Yes. For the last 70 years, the middle class built wealth through homeownership and compound interest on savings. Today, because housing costs have barricaded the entry to property ownership, how are the youth supposed to build wealth?
Well, by fundamentally changing how we structure living arrangements and share equity. Markets and societies are highly dynamic, and we are already seeing the market create intergenerational solutions to this exact problem. The WEEF report highlighted new models for lifelong living that are emerging right now.
Are you talking about the co-living apps?
No, I'm talking about formalized models, like the Kuvu model in Spain. Let's look at the mechanics of how it actually works, because it's brilliant. It isn't just an app for finding roommates.
What is it then?
It legally structures a contract between a cash-poor, house-rich retiree and a younger worker who is priced out of the rental market. It reallocates existing unused real estate capacity without requiring the younger person to take on massive debt. The rent is heavily subsidized in exchange for shared household responsibilities.
Okay, I understand the mechanics of the contract. It solves a temporary cash flow problem, but what does it do for wealth accumulation?
It dramatically lowers the younger person's cost of living, which frees up their capital to be invested elsewhere, rather than being sunk entirely into rent. We also see the forward living model in Hong Kong, which is completely changing the economics of institutional care and housing by integrating generations.
I'm not convinced.
But isn't it historically short-sighted to assume that severe housing and demographic pressures won't catalyze new, sustainable models of living? The middle class of the 1950s looked very different from the middle class of the 1850s.
True.
The middle class of the 2040s will adapt by changing how we live, share equity, and structure our communities.
I have to firmly reject the idea that intergenerational roommate contracts are a solution to a systemic wealth crisis. Asking the youth to rent a subsidized room from a retiree in Spain might keep them off the street, but it does not solve the fundamental problem.
Which is?
Traditional, safe wealth accumulation is completely blocked.
You don't think freeing up their monthly income allows them to invest?
Invest in what? Let's go back to the basic math. If traditional safe savings yield a 7% return on a fixed deposit, but basic, unavoidable inflation on middle-class essentials is 12%, your capital is shrinking.
You're losing purchasing power, yes.
The middle class is effectively being taxed twice, once by the government and once by structural inflation that eats their savings. Because that safe path yields negative real returns, the youth are being pushed into incredibly risky financial strategies. We see young adults speculating on cryptocurrency, highly leveraged day trading, and prediction markets.
Which carries immense risk.
Exactly. But they aren't doing it because they are naturally reckless. They are doing it because when the traditional math of the middle class yields nothing, gambling on high-variance assets feels like the only rational way to escape the nominal wage trap. You cannot co-live your way out of a systemic transfer of wealth from labor to capital. Their financial resilience is being permanently eroded.
I see why you think the math is permanently broken, but we have to remember that capital and labor shares operate in long historical cycles. We are currently at the peak of a capital-heavy cycle, driven by the digital revolution and globalization.
A very long peak.
But policies adapt. The mechanism linking productivity to prosperity is under repair, not severed completely.
How so? The financial architecture outlined by the World Inequality Lab suggests the opposite. Developing countries are currently trapped in a system where they borrow at high rates and invest at low yields, transferring wealth to advanced economies. The macroeconomic system is rigged the exact same way the microeconomic system is rigged against the individual worker.
But the pain points you're describing, the unaffordability of housing, the anxiety over AI replacing youth, the nominal wage trap, these are the exact catalysts that drive massive policy reform.
If the political will exists,
the World Inequality Lab itself notes that inequality is a political choice, not an inevitable physical law. Because the pain has become so acute, we are finally seeing real, substantive discussions around universal basic income, global minimum corporate tax rates, and wealth taxes.
Discussions, sure.
History proves that democratic societies push back when the middle class is threatened. We did it during the Industrial Revolution with labor laws and the weekend, and we will do it again in the AI revolution.
But the reforms are not keeping pace with the destruction. While we wait for these grand 30-year macroeconomic cycles to correct themselves, a whole generation is being left behind.
That's a grim outlook.
It's the reality. They don't have the luxury of waiting for a global minimum corporate tax rate to be negotiated. They have to pay rent today. They have to pay school fees today. And when they look at the job market, they see the entry-level stepping stones vanishing. This isn't a transition. It is a permanent restructuring of society where a tiny elite owns the cognitive shipping containers and everyone else is just fighting over the scraps.
Well, as we draw to a close, I want to summarize where I stand on this, because the stakes just couldn't be higher. There is absolutely no denying that the current squeeze on the global middle class is intensely painful. The combination of sticky inflation, severe housing unaffordability, and rapid technological disruption has created a profound and justified anxiety.
Very justified.
But the data points to a temporary stagnation, a bottleneck in our economic evolution. Economies are complex, adaptive systems. History proves that they adapt to new technologies. With the right policy adjustments, the continued democratization of AI compute power, and new, innovative models of shared living, the middle class will find a new equilibrium. We are in the messy middle of a transition, not the end of the line.
And I remain convinced that the traditional math of the middle class is irrevocably broken. We just cannot ignore the lived reality. The nominal wage trap is actively destroying wealth in emerging markets, forcing families to fund their survival with debt despite earning more on paper.
Right.
AI is eliminating the vital entry-level jobs that the youth desperately need to build their careers, replacing the latter with a barricade. And overarching all of this is a global financial system that systematically favors capital over labor, capturing the gains of productivity while leaving the middle 40% stagnant since 1980.
Yeah.
This is not a rough patch that can be fixed with a co-living app. It is a permanent systemic crisis that requires a radical rethinking of how society and wealth accumulation actually function.
We both certainly agree that the current pressures on the middle class are entirely unprecedented in their scale and complexity. It is clear that the old 20th century playbook needs updating, whether through gradual adaptation or radical reform. We will leave it to you, the listener, to decide whether we are navigating a painful but temporary transition or witnessing the end of the middle class era entirely.
I highly recommend diving into the source material for further exploration. There is a profound depth of data in the reports from the WEF, Brookings, and the World Inequality Lab on these global economic shifts, and looking at the numbers yourself is incredibly illuminating.
Indeed, if there is one thing this debate highlights, it's that the global economy is undergoing a massive rewiring. Whether you view that rewiring as the construction of a new foundation or the demolition of the old one, understanding the mechanics behind it is the only way to prepare for what comes next. Thank you for joining us on The Debate.